But can I firstly welcome you to the UK Pavilion. It's great to have you here. We managed to get a lot done. We managed to get governments, we managed to get institutions. Along with many of you. Third time lucky. Thank you. If only I got this reaction every time. As I said, I was at the World Bank meetings in Washington in October, and at the same time, we also had a discussion around Motley's and calls for reform of the MDB's financial architecture that we have around. For me, personally, I think the time has come for Woods 2 moment, where we embed risk across our international financial architecture. We also then had work on access to finance, and with our friends in Fiji, we've co-chaired the task force on access to finance. And just yesterday, I was at an event which was hosted by Chancellor Scholz, where we talked about the Global Risk Shield. So there's a lot of work that's gone on, and the one thing we do understand is that without finance, none of what needs to happen will happen. So it's absolutely critical that we deliver on all of these commitments. We're now going to move to the panel, so could I ask the first panel to please come up? Speak now, or how are you doing this? Right. I think we will start with Lord next turn to hear her views on the post-2025 goal and, of course, the Stern Songway Review, which was launched yesterday.
Should use it. There's a first is a test. Are you getting an echo? Yeah. Is this the only one that we have? Because everybody's hearing it twice in very quick succession. Is it less of an echo if I get it really close? Okay. So you got to get your mouth around this. So thank you very much, Alok. I'll try to be quick. But as we focus on finance, let's note just how extraordinary COP26 was, right up the upper end of expectations, with the leadership of the wonderful leadership of Alok and the team. I've been to all the COPs since 2006. I'm sure there are many people with longer records than that. But this was really top end of any expectation. If you look at the net zero, the 1.5, the private sector, the breakthrough coalitions, the post-25 quantitative goal, as Alok emphasized, you know, the jet Ps, the methane, the US-China discussion, the crucial speech by Prime Minister Modi, which set out a new growth model, sustainable growth model for India. We could go on. It's remarkable how much was achieved there. Now, we're talking about finance today in particular, and one of the key features of the finance at Glasgow was finance for a purpose, finance for a what? Not that it's very important that the 100 billion is achieved, that's a matter of trust. But when we talk G-fans, and Alice is here, when we talk about the Jet P for South Africa, this is finance for a particular purpose, for investment in the whole transition process. And that is what we tried to do in the Songway Stern story. Finance for what? Finance for climate action in the context of a new way of growth and development, much better than the dirty, destructive paths. Climate and development intertwined, not separate subjects. So what we looked at in the Songway Stern, with my colleague Amar Bhattacharya playing absolutely key role as the executive secretary, what we did is said, what are the key investments necessary for delivery of Paris, and of course Paris as taken forward in Glasgow. We looked at the energy transition. We looked at loss and damage, adaptation, resilience as a second big category, and we looked at natural capital. We argued that the necessary investments for those, clearly the whole story of development, were around $2.4 trillion a year in 2030. Of course, building up, we're in a hurry. We can't wait till 2030. That build up net flow by 2030. A bit over 1 trillion in the energy transition, around 1 trillion of investment expenditure in those categories of loss and damage, adaptation, resilience, and natural capital. And then you ask, how could those investments be financed? Now, the majority of finance, in most cases, is internal finance. It's domestic capital, the government revenues. That's how finance for investment. But we argued you need about 1 trillion in flow by 2030. So a bit over 1 trillion internal, about 1 trillion external. That 1 trillion external, private sector, MDBs, and low-cost or grant finance. Low-cost grant finance comes from mobilize the different sources of finance to give the action that we know. It's deductive. Believe me, I was there at the 100 billion negotiation back in 2009. It was negotiated. What we've described here is the flows that we need to generate the investment that we need to deliver on Paris. So it's a very specific, purpose-led story. Within that, private sector has to be in a world where the cost of capital is manageable. That means that the MDBs play a critical role, and we've argued for a tripling of the finance for the MDBs within 5 years. And Alok, as Alok has said, that means a fundamental change and advance in their role. Thank you very much.
The echo sort of feels like you're sort of another universe, doesn't it? Anyway, so long as you're able to hear, we'll fix it for the next event. I'm now like to invite Ambroise Foyel from the EIB to set out the view from the MDBs.
Thank you so much. Many thanks for the invitation. I'm Foyel, I'm Vice President of the European Investment Bank, and I'm going to to speak here this morning on behalf of all the multilateral development banks. It's incredibly important to take stock 1 year on from Glasgow. And what we have done last year is to issue a statement on nature, people, and planet. And actually we did this because we understand very well how inextricably linked climate, nature, and development are. They are deeply intertwined. So we have worked a lot as multilateral development banks on this year. In our statement, we said that we would further mainstream nature into our policies, into our analysis, our assessments, and actually that we are going to be work on 5 main areas. One, by showing MDB leadership on the subject. 2, by tackling the drivers of nature loss, by fostering and making what we call nature positive investments. 3, by fostering synergies in approach at the national and regional levels. 4, by valuing and accounting for nature to properly guide decision making. And finally, through ensuring we have robust tracking and reporting methodologies in place. We did that in a context where we face 3 challenges: that we need to shift from focus on projects to a focus on more systemic impact to transform our current food infrastructure and finance system, that we need to improve our accounting methods to better clarify our exposure to nature-related risks and opportunities, and that we need to create new revenue streams to support nature-positive activities by developing nature markets. We've made progress in these areas, and we will be announcing this at COP15 in a few weeks in Montreal. Here at COP27, the MDBs have launched the BlueMed partnership, the Blue Economy Resilient Africa program, and a few others. And the MDBs have agreed to establish a biodiversity and nature working group similar to the one we have on climate. This will help us accelerate our efforts and ultimately contribute to the recovery of ecosystems at the local, national, and regional level across geographies where we operate. Alongside this, MDBs have made good progress on Paris alignment since COP26. Our adaptation finance tracking methodology has now been updated, and we have a presentation today on the methodologies for ensuring Paris alignment in intermediated lending, in policy-based lending, and in working capital. The path ahead of us is complex. Above all, the goal is clear. We must halve biodiversity loss and reverse the trends as soon as we can. I thank you very much for the time you allotted me.
So we're going to mix it up a bit, ask who I've had the pleasure of working with very closely over the last few years. So thank you, Jean-Darc, for the cooperation. But please come and give us your views from a developing emerging economy perspective.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to be with you for this important event on reviewing the progress we have made since today. Global temperatures are predicted to rise by 2.8 degrees Celsius. Wealthy countries must also meet their commitment to finance climate action in developing nations or to curb their emissions. This means reaching the $100 billion per year goal, doubling financing for adaptation, as well as replenishing the Green Climate Fund. Vulnerable nations, however, cannot rely on external and public financing alone. That is why Rwanda launched Ireme Invest, which is a branded financial facility, a new green investment facility that will use a branded finance approach to bring our domestic private sector into the fight against climate change through innovative and tailored financial products. I'm pleased that the facility has achieved an initial capitalization yesterday of $104 million, including £7 million contributed by the UK government through the Task Force for Access to Climate Finance Partnerships. We have also received contributions from Sweden, an anchor country, and the Task Force and the European Investment Bank. We thank you. The Agence Française de Développement, the Global Climate Partnership Fund, and the Development Bank of Rwanda, we thank you. We are also pleased to be launching Rwanda's NDC facility next week with our partner, Germany, another anchor country under the task force which is capitalizing the fund. It is my hope that the recommendations of the task force will continue to be implemented in full. The speed and scale of climate finance must increase, and we must shift from project to program-based funding. I'm also pleased that the climate and development ministerials that we have been holding since COP26 have provided significant momentum and guidance. I can inform you that next week on 15th November from 8:30 to 9:30 at the Rwanda Pavilion, we will co-host with my friend Alok and Egypt leadership, hopefully, a climate and development forward plan, high-level event, and I'm inviting you to that event. For those interested in the Access to Finance Task Force, on Monday at 10 a.m., we will have a roundtable discussion on programmatic platform-based financing at the same pavilion from 10 to 11 a.m. Thank you, Alok, and your team for convening meetings and events under this framework, and for bringing high and low-emitting countries to the table to reach a greater and common understanding on the way forward. Our event on keeping 1.5 degrees alive and the Glasgow Climate Pact during the recent Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Kigali is just one example. Once again, I would like to thank you, Alok, for your leadership as COP26 President, and I commend your team for their hard working. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you for that, Minister. We're now going to hear the voice of the private sector, because we always talk about turning the billions into the trillions. The trillions sit with Alice. She has the trillions. If you need them, she's the person to talk to. But Alice is here obviously representing GFAN, so please give us your view.
I think I might be a bit small for the podium, so I'll stay here. So I wanted to start by saying that I think GFANS is one of the big successes of the UK COP presidency, because without finance, we won't get to net zero on time. With finance, we stand a chance, but there's a lot to do. So we have some encouraging signs. We now have 550 financial institutions globally that have committed to net zero by 2050, and that's across their financed emissions. That's up 100 on COP26, so we're still growing. But we have got to the stage where in major economies, a significant share of the major financial institutions are already in. So our focus now is on building regional outreach. And we had the first meeting of our Africa Advisory Board this week, the first in-person meeting, which was great. And we had our APAC Advisory Board meetings recently in Singapore. And the idea there is to help understand the challenges of net zero transition in different regions, and make sure that we're developing frameworks that work for everyone. So where are we? We are now at the stage where the firms that made commitments are turning to the difficult work of delivering on them. And it is pretty difficult, I must say that. I think, we're on the backdrop of a global energy crisis, and we're trying to get from an investment in energy, fossil fuel energy, to renewable energy of 1-to-1 currently, to 1-to-4 as quickly as we can, while keeping the lights on. And of course, there are many other sectors we need to help transition. So the members of GFANZ are currently working through their financing activities, speaking to corporates in particular to understand their transition challenges, and to encourage those that they finance to develop transition plans as well. So this needs to feed through the system. Ideally, we would have government-level transition planning, corporate-level transition planning, and financial sector transition planning. We can try and pull it through the other way around, but that's going to be a bit slower. But we are doing what we can, and we have tried to ensure that the firms in GFANZ have the tools that they need. So last week, we issued a very rigorously developed transition planning framework for all of our members and beyond to use. And that represents the best practices in transition planning. And I just want to reiterate that what we're asking the firms to do is to, from board and CEO level down, transition their entire business. This is a work in progress for everybody, but the major firms that are taking this seriously are going through their business activities, corporate by corporate. I won't say household by household yet, but corporate by corporate. And working out how can we transition smoothly? Because our membership is now 40% of global private finance. So if they move too quickly or not at all, we will have a big problem for the economy and for society. So we are trying to find the right glide path. Before I move on, I mentioned the renewables challenge. I think the second big challenge is around getting capital to flow to emerging markets. So currently, capital flows into renewable energy in emerging markets has stagnated. Internally, it's growing, but cross-border, it's stagnated. So we are proud to support the work on the JETPs, which the UK is also very actively supporting. And we are working very hard with our members to identify the barriers that cause them not to invest as we hope they would. And we are trying to work very constructively as part of the JETP processes to get the capital flowing. And for example, we had a very good meeting yesterday with Vietnam to talk through the JETP there. So, and last night the Egyptians announced progress on their NWEFE platform, and we've been working there to help highlight the barriers to finance and help get them addressed so that capital will be unlocked. Thank you.
Alice, thank you very much for that. And we are indeed working very closely with GFANZ on the JETPs. I'm now going to ask Norbert Gorison, our friend from the German government, to come and talk to us about the $100 billion delivery plan.
Thank you. I try without mic. It disturbs me too much, this echo, to hear myself twice. So, thanks for the invitation, and thank you to the UK COP26 Presidency for all the work they have done on climate finance in the preparation of COP26, in COP26 and after COP26. Can't hear me? Okay, I hate it. Okay, so the first point I was making was thank you to the UK Presidency for all their efforts before the COP, during the COP, after the COP, on all the various aspects of finance. One of it was to look more seriously on the commitment of the 100 billion. Germany and Canada have prepared the so-called delivery plan, when and how we would deliver on the 100 billion. That was released last year. And Alok has asked us to do an update of that, or we called it a progress report of what have been done since. We have not updated the numbers, but we have looked at what actions have been taken by donors over the last year. First of all the governments have confirmed they stick to their commitments. They are confident that the 100 billion could be achieved by 2023. And then we looked in this report in particular to 4 action areas, which I would briefly elaborate. Before I do that, I would also announce that at 12:45 there will be a full focused side event in the Canadian pavilion, including Alok Sharma, the 2 ministers, Jennifer Morgan and Steve Guilbeault, well, that will be the focus of the event. So the 4 areas is first adaptation finance. Last year we agreed to double adaptation finance, and I think it has become clear now that means from 20 billion per year to 40 billion per year. And also there's a strong request of getting more clarity and transparency. What we provided in this report is a table with detailed informations of what all individual donors and the financial institutions are doing with respect to adaptation finance. And we hope that this creates more trust and understanding for in the developing country world. Second action area is access to finance. Over and over again, we hear that it's difficult for developing countries to access the financial institutions, and I think there's some legitimacy in it. We commissioned a study and looked more in detail in what are the issues, and we found out the 3 C's, which is capacity, coordination, coherence, and communication. And I would highlight in particular capacities. Addressing the capacity issue in developing countries to approach the finance, to be able to fill out the templates and the applications is absolutely key, and that's also something which the task force on access already has worked on over the last year. The third action area is MDBs. The MDBs contributed 30 billion out of the 83 billion in 2020. We have a report that they are mobilizing even more in 2021, up to 50 billion, but still we think there's a lot more developing MDBs could be doing, in particular with respect to mobilizing finance from the private sector. They are sitting in the heart of the system, and we heard a lot of requests with respect to better analytics, implementing the capital adequacy review of the G20, creating incentives for countries to borrow for climate instead for any purposes, providing more concessionality, and perhaps also something on earmarked capital increase. The fourth area is private finance mobilized, and that was an area where the results were most disappointing from a donor perspective, because we were able to mobilize much lower than we have expected. So I heard that the ratio of in MDBs is only 1:1. So we agreed with other donors to commission a study to look at the lessons we learned and why it's not working, and come out with the result over next year. But there's a lively debate about climate finance, private climate finance, anyway here in this COP, and we hope that this is accelerated during this COP and amplified, because in the end we need a stronger focus than ever before on Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement, which is on aligning financial flows. And more work needs to be done here, because listening to an extern, that's the only way we can solve the problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Norbert, for that very comprehensive feedback, and thank you for persevering with our unique mic system here, which will be fixed for the next event. I'm now going to ask our final panelist, Minister Abeleche from Uruguay, who's going to talk to us about mobilizing and aligning finance within emerging markets. Minister.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. Our agricultural production, but at the same time reduce the emissions of methane and nitrous oxide emissions. Preserve our grassland, which is unique. For those of you who don't know Uruguay, we have a lot of grass like UK, and we have more cows than people. And we also are very careful to preserve our natural forestry. When this administration took office in 2020, we took further steps in terms of achieving a sustainable policy in terms of environment. So from the beginning, we added in our budget law an article where we explicitly said we're mainstreaming environmental policy into our fiscal and financial policy. We also took additional steps like implementing a tax on the emissions, carbon dioxide emissions that come from fuel fossil, equivalent to $130 per ton. But in the Ministry of Economy, we thought that more had to be done, that we had to move from ideas, strategy, into implementation. And in that sense, I think that COP26 was a very important point in our process, thinking how to do something concrete to deliver, to walk the talk. So, as Alok Sharma said at the beginning, we know that financial incentives are very important. Financial incentives, when put into climate policy, they are a very powerful tool. So that is the way we thought, we moved. We had many meetings with investors all around the world for many months. We had meetings with the rating agencies, with second-party opinions, with ICMA, with the London Stock Exchange, with different personalities that knew a lot about this topic, like Mr. Alok Sharma, like Mr. McCartney, like Lord Stern. And finally, last month, we issued the first ever bond where the interest payment is linked to environmental behavior. So we think that this is a very important structure that really can change more resources into really going into something concrete. This bond has a two-way structure coupon. We have a step up and a step down that is related to two key performance indicators. The first key performance indicator is about the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in terms of GDP. The second one is about the conservation of our natural forestry. The second point was specially asked by investors. This came from the feedback from investors. So it is performance indicators, they are overperformed. Uruguay has a step down, and we receive the benefit for having the appropriate, the correct environmental behavior. On the contrary, if we don't meet these targets, then Uruguay has a step down, and we are penalized for not being achieving our environmental objectives. The two key features of the new structure, I would say, first, it's the first time that we mainstream the NDCs into sovereign finance. This is the first time that a country with this two-way structure mainstreams the NDCs from Paris Agreement into something concrete. So this speaks of a political resolve in the country, in an emerging market country, to really put NDCs into a financially binding position. Without this, NDCs are not financially, they don't put a restriction, they don't bind countries, so this makes a big change. I think this is a big leap for any emerging market. I would say for any country, this is a big leap. The second feature is that climate and nature goals, they address different global public goods, but they are complementary. So we think that this is very important. And this could be a very important instrument for mobilizing G-Funds resources, as was stated in Glasgow in COP26. Last but not least, we think this structure replicable in capital markets for other countries, but also could be replicable for disbursement for multilateral institutions. So differentiating lending borrowers according to environmental conditions would be a very important if we want to move forward. So to wrap up, financial incentives are a very powerful instrument that we have if we want to make progress in terms of climate sustainability. And these testing times call for a change of mindset if we really want to move from ideas to implementation, if we really want to walk the talk. Thank you.
Minister, thank you for that. I think we've probably got time for one question. Has anyone got a burning question? Nope, everything's been answered. Marvelous. Well, thank you very much for coming. And could I have a round of applause